Hello and welcome. Tonight we are going to be reading some stories from a website called Liminal Earth. And if you aren't familiar, this is a website where people submit their first-hand paranormal or strange, anomalous, unexplainable experiences. And not just that, they also tag the location on a community map. So not only can you read their experience, but you can also see exactly where it took place. So this map used to be, they used to use Google Maps embedded onto their website, but unfortunately Google was going to charge them some exorbitant amount of money to have it embedded on their website, so now they've come up with an alternative option. But I have taken the location of the stories, and I'm going to do Google Street View of the place where the experience happened, and so I will walk us through Street View while I read the stories. Tonight, all the stories are going to concern time. Time distortion, missing time, possibly some time travelers. Right now, all I've done is pick out a handful of stories that are concerned with time, and we're just gonna wing it. I'm not even sure what all I'll have to add. So, if all that sounds good to you, reading stories about time and taking a stroll virtually where they took place, let's get started. Our first story takes place in Wales, in a village called Neath. And it says that this took place in 1856. This was submitted by Stardog. Neath is the location of the oldest known modern-day UFO abduction catalogued case in the UK. Ronald Rees was walking home from his work as a farm laborer when he spotted a strange light in a field. On investigating the light, the next thing Ronald knew was that he was floating in the air, and after that, his memory is patchy. He believed that tiny humanoids with swords performed various operations on him. The next thing he was aware of was awaking in the same field he had seen the object in, and discovered he had lost an entire week. In common with many modern encounters, afterwards, Rees exhibited symptoms similar to radiation exposure. His skin was pink and scarred, and he suffered from hair loss. So, at the end of this story, they put the source as Welsh History, Strange But True, which is a book by Jeff Brooks. The back of the book says, this book contains hundreds of strange but true facts and anecdotes about Welsh history, arranged into a miniature history of Wales, and with bizarre and hilarious true tales for every era. It will interest and delight readers everywhere. And it's set up kind of like an encyclopedia of strange facts, but instead of going alphabetically, it goes chronologically. So this book does have an entry for the story we just read. It says, 1856, Neath. In 1856, Ronald Rees in the Vale of Neath disappeared for a week after seeing a strange light that was making a loud noise whilst he was going home from work. He went to investigate the light, which was in a field, and suddenly believed he was floating in the air. He then remembered being physically examined by small creatures who helped themselves to a sample of his blood. Then it all went blank. He had no idea he'd been missing for a week until neighbors asked him where he had been. This close encounter left him in quite a state. His skin was covered in scars and had turned bright pink, and his hair was falling out. So, what was this? Was it a terrible combination of alien abduction and radiation poisoning? Or just Neath beer? So, from what I can tell, this book is the only source I could find for this story. So, all of the details kind of come from that book. That being said, I'm not sure where Stardog got the details about the tiny humanoids with swords detail. all it says in this book is that he was examined by small creatures who helped themselves to a sample of his blood. So I was kind of curious where they got that detail, because it is a very striking and unique detail, phrasing of it. So it does ring true with a lot of, UFO reports, although it does happen about 100 years earlier than this kind of thing started becoming much more widely reported, right? And of course, the book doesn't mention a UFO, a craft or anything. It just mentions a light in a field, floating in the air, being physically examined by small creatures. So it is interesting, isn't it? He doesn't seem to assign any kind of source or identity of the creatures that were examining him. So that is very interesting. It follows a lot of common details in UFO abductions, right? And of course, missing time. He missed a week. That's a substantial amount of time. I don't think he was lying in a field for a week. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I think he'd be in a lot worse shape. This is a perfect example of, you could assign this to UFOs, or you could assign it to fairies, because time loss is big in fairy lore. And it seems to happen without you even really realizing it, whether it's because time passes differently wherever fairies dwell. Who knows? We can only speculate. Speaking of fairies and their realms, would you just look at what I found? When I paused to check the paranormal database to see if there were any entries for Neath, I found this. It says, entrance to fairyland. Location, Vale of Neath. Date and time, possibly 12th century. Elidurus visited fairyland via an entrance located somewhere in the Vale. In the other land, horses and greyhounds were the same as our world, only much smaller. The sky was always cloudy, and the fairies consumed only milk. Elidurus returned several times, but after trying to steal some gold for his mother, discovered that the doorway to fairyland had been once again hidden. Before I go on, I did think that it was interesting that the town's name is Neath, which sounds like a shortening of beneath, if I'm pronouncing the town's name correctly, that is. And in Celtic folklore, fairies are often said to live beneath hills or beneath the ground. So the fairy bells already kind of went off in my head when I read Neath being the town's name. So it says that this legend took place in the Vale of Neath, which is one of the South Wales valleys. This valley contains the town of Neath, and this valley is also known for its waterfalls. It's nicknamed Waterfall Country. It's extremely beautiful. It certainly looks like it could be an entrance to fairyland. So when I went to track down a little bit more information about this entrance to fairyland rumor, I found reference to it in Wirt Sykes' British Goblins. And he says that the tale of Elidurus was written in Latin by Giraldus Cambrensis, who was a Welshman. And he says he wrote a book in 1188 after touring Wales. And this is some of the story that he wrote down. I found the book that apparently this story is from, the book by Giraldus Cambrensis, which is in Latin, but there is a translation of it by Sir R.C. Hoare. But I couldn't find the story of Elidurus in it, so I'm just going to read what Wirt Sykes has in his book, British Goblins. Wirt Sykes says, the scene of the tale is that Vale of Neath, already named as a famous center of fairyland. Elidurus, when a youth of 12 years, in order to avoid the severity of his preceptor, ran away from school and concealed himself under the hollow bank of a river. After he had fasted in that situation for 2 days, 2 little men of pygmy stature appeared to him and said, if you go with us, we will lead you into a country full of delights and sports. Elidurus followed his guides through a path at first subterraneous and dark into a most beautiful country. but obscure and not illuminated with the full light of the sun. All the days in that country were cloudy and the nights extremely dark. The boy was brought before the king of this strange little people and introduced him in the presence of his court. Having examined Eligirus for a long time, the king delivered him to his son, that prince being then a boy. The men of this country, though of the smallest stature, were very well proportioned, fair complexioned, and wore long hair. They had horses and greyhounds adapted to their size. They neither ate flesh nor fish, but lived on a milk diet, made up into messes with saffron. The boy frequently returned to their hemisphere, sometimes by the way he had gone, and sometimes by others, at first in company and afterwards alone, and made himself known only to his mother, to whom he described what he had seen. His mother wanted Eligirus to bring her a present of gold, with which all that country abounded, and he stole, whilst at play with the king's son, a golden ball with which he used to divert himself, and brought it in haste to his mother, but not unpursued, for, as he entered the house of his father, he stumbled at the threshold. The ball fell, and 2 pygmies seized it, departed, showing the boy every mark of contempt and derision. Notwithstanding every attempt for the space of a year, he never again could find the track to the subterraneous passage. And apparently he said that they spoke Latin. So, not only is it interesting to me that, I took the story we read from Neith of the man being abducted, and I thought, accompanied with missing time, you could liken it to fairy lore and time spent in a fairy land. Not only do we find out that Neith possibly has an entrance to fairyland, but also that the fairies in this said land are said to be of small stature. And didn't the man, Ronald Reese, I think was his name, didn't the man in the story we originally read, didn't he describe the people as tiny humanoids, a tiny people? Very interesting, very interesting. Wales I find to be just a fascinating place, visually stunning and also rich with history and folklore and fairy lore. While I was looking for things about Neith on the paranormal database, that wasn't the only thing I found. So, another story I found is about a water horse. If you're not familiar with water horses, maybe you've heard of a Kelpie. They're not real horses. They may kind of look like a real horse, but they come out of pools and bodies of water, and they usually aren't very nice. We'll just put it that way. So, there is a legend of a water horse in Neith as well. The paranormal database says a traveler once climbed on the back of a white stallion in this area, which flew him many miles before fading into mist and dissipating. And I actually found reference to this in Marie Trevelyan's book, Folklore and Folk Stories of Wales, a book I cite all the time and I just adore. Such an amazing book. So, let me read that for you. There's a whole chapter in this book about water horses. So, regarding this story, it says, near Glyn Neath, a beautiful locality which is much frequented on account of the cascades caused by a number of rivers, a man, tired out after a long journey, lingered to rest in a shady nook. A water horse slowly came up from under the foaming cascade, shook the spray from its snow-white mane, and ascended the slope upon which the tired man rested. By and by the animal neighed, then snorted, and tossed its head proudly in the sunlight. The weary man was tempted to mount the fine creature, and this he found was remarkably easy of accomplishment. Soon he was safely astride the noble horse. Saddle and bridle he had not, but the grateful man felt the white mane of the animal to be an excellent substitute. He had not long mounted before he observed that the horse was going at an unusual speed. Moreover, he noticed that the horse's hooves did not appear to touch the ground. For a time, the astonished rider enjoyed the rapid rate at which the horse conveyed him, but after a while he became slightly alarmed. Wonder took the place of enjoyment, and soon terror supplanted both, as uphill and down dale the horse went with the speed of lightning. It was moonrise when he found himself thrown on the slope of a hill. The shock of the fall was very great. For a few moments, he was completely dazed. Upon recovering his composure, he looked around for the horse which had carried him so swiftly and so far. To his surprise, the animal's graceful form became gradually indistinct. Then, by slow degrees, it appeared to merge into a vapory cloud that hung low over the hill. By and by, it vanished altogether. In the early night, the man descended the slope, and after walking a mile or more, he found himself in an ancient village in Cardiganshire. It was sunset when he left Glyn Neath, and the long distance extending between that place and the remote village in Cardiganshire had been traversed in the short space of about an hour. So, not only is that a fantastic story, it also kind of almost counts as missing time or a time distortion. He says that he traversed a large amount of distance in a short amount of time. Maybe it counts, maybe it doesn't. Anyway, like I said when I started, I really didn't know where I was going to be led, pixie-led, as it were, with the stories I picked out. I just knew I wanted to focus on time distortions, and this is where we went with the first one. We were taking on a wild ride into Wales and into fairyland. So we're off to a great start. Let's move on to our next story. So, this story took place in Washington in March of 2012, and it was submitted by Jess J. My now husband and I were returning from a family friend's wedding. It was late evening, dark out, around 8 p.m. We were happily chatting about the weekend we'd just had and our plans after we returned home, with the radio quietly playing in the background. We crossed the bridge and blinked. Suddenly, there was a different car in front of us. The radio was off, and we were on the wrong side of the bridge, approaching it to be crossed again. When we turned the radio back on to break our now terrified and confused silence, 30 minutes had elapsed in a time that felt like seconds to us. We didn't know what to do other than continue on. As we neared the town we were living in at the time, the car died. The brand new car battery that had been replaced less than 6 months before that was fried, an acrid, smoky smell emitting from it. To this day, we have no idea what happened, and ever since, we now avoid that bridge during the night. Everyone who is a driver probably has experienced that feeling of going into autopilot when you're driving to a familiar destination, home or work, and you just kind of zone out, and all of a sudden you're home and you don't really remember the journey getting there. So it is very easy to enter this meditative state at times when driving, especially if you're going somewhere familiar. But that is not what happened in this case. These people were present, they were chatting to each other, they were stimulated from just being at a wedding. So I don't think that they could have just zoned out. Maybe if it was just one person alone, but if there's two people, they just blink and suddenly they're about to cross the bridge they already crossed. I can't imagine how strange that would be. So, many strange things happen while driving and while on the road. I have a whole series of strange things seen while driving, and a lot of UFO experiences are said to take place while driving, abductions and that kind of thing. And I will touch on that a little more in a minute, but these types of stories, missing time while driving, are very common. I found a few of them. So I'm going to read a couple more. So let's just go right on to our next one. This one was submitted by M and took place in September of 2015. One time, I was driving with two close friends from Morgantown, West Virginia to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is about 70 miles. It normally takes about 90 minutes total travel time with traffic. Friend A and I left from Morgantown and went to Dunkard to pick up friend B for the journey, which we had made dozens of times, if not more, for a monthly movie night. We had many times driven through Bobtown, a nearby unincorporated coal town, for its creepy ambiance on our night drives. This night was particularly overcast and foggy, so we decided to keep with that tradition, stay off the highway, and take the longer, spookier route to Pittsburgh. So, we set off from Friend B's house through Bobtown, one of us commenting that perhaps we were in the mists of Ravenloft, which I had to look up as a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. As the fog had suddenly become very dense, we proceeded through the town slowly, noting the almost false-seeming stillness of the town, and soon after emerged right outside Pittsburgh. None of us have ever been able to explain how we passed through 50-ish miles of terrain in under 20 minutes. The car's clock and our phone's timekeeping abilities confirmed that very little time had passed. None of us has a memory of shortcut or other detour, and we all fully expected nearly an hour of driving. Somehow, we went through Bobtown and skipped an hour of travel and a great distance in its fog. The Allegheny Mountains and the fact that we were in a 94 Nissan Sentra really make this whole thing make less sense. Even if I had been speeding, there's no way I could have made that kind of time for that trip. Absolutely bananas. Weirdly, to this day I often have dreams about Bobtown, or about going there. It was never our destination. I don't think I ever even stopped there. So, I do like the notes they put at the end about how they still have dreams about Bobtown, even though they never even actually stopped there, which I would say, if they're still in the vicinity, that they should make a special trip out and, stop and go see what's up in Bobtown, since they dream about it and had some weird, misty time slip there. Might be something interesting going on in Bobtown. And I love the sound of this tradition, this monthly movie night tradition that these friends had, and they would pick each other up on the way and take this long drive, insisting on taking the back roads to make it spookier and more fun. Me and my friends would take so many night drives when we were teenagers, just drive out to some switchbacks in the country, and we found that to be very fun and very spooky. So, like I said, these stories of missing time while driving are common, and Jenny Randles, you know her, you love her, cites a lot of time distortions that happen whilst driving in her book Time Storms, although they particularly specifically involve seeing odd clouds or weather anomalies prior to the occurrence of missing time. And I actually have not read this book. Unfortunately, it's out of print, and all of the copies online are super expensive. I checked my libraries. There's no ebook version. There is a version on the Internet Archive, although it's not the official version. Someone translated it from a dictation in Russian or something. I don't know. They're very transparent about that in the documents, but as tempted as I was to read that, just because I want to read this book, I couldn't be sure that I was actually reading the correct text. So, fortunately, I have not read the book. I did find this extensive interview that Jenny Randles did about the book with this UFO journal called Project Red Book, and this is from 2001. So let me read a little bit of that for you. Here's one of the examples she gives of a time storm. A couple were driving late at night when a blue glow enveloped their car. They were surrounded by a noise like rushing air. The car radio filled with static, and the headlights dimmed and went out. Then the car literally rose up off the road a few feet into the air. Now the couple realized they were inside a mist or cloud that seemed to be glowing and emitting a smell like electric arcing. Then there was a blink in reality, and they were back on the road at some place further on without recall of any spatial or temporal transition. It was also more than an hour later. The wife developed a red rash and, being pregnant, was rushed into hospital feeling ill. They assumed she had an infection of some sort, but nursed her through and she recovered. The child was born prematurely, but was well. Her husband suffered too in the immediate aftermath. Stopping at a petrol station, he could not coordinate his body movements and kept walking into doors, unable to make his legs and hands act as his brain was telling them to do. He felt temporarily out of phase with reality. Exactly this curious after effect is reported in several other time storm cases in the book, where a perfectly reasonable medical explanation is provided that is totally consistent with the witness testimony. But there's no way most of these witnesses would be knowledgeable enough about physics to have made up such a logical account. This example actually does sound like the last two stories we read. There's some similarities. As with the first story we read with the bridge, there was the blink in reality, and there was that electrical smell, which for them came from the battery of their car. And same as in the second story that we just read, they were enveloped by a mist, and then it was an hour later. So Jenny Randles makes a point that a lot of people who are invested in ufology would hear these kind of reports and immediately think that this was a case of alien abduction, and then get the people, the witnesses, into regressive hypnosis, and then all these details would come out that would support a story of abduction. But when it comes to cases that specifically involve these weather anomalies and the missing time, these clouds, these kind of electrical storms, coupled with the missing time, rather than assign these particular types of instances into alien abduction or something of that nature, she argues that these are, quote, some kind of actual physical phenomenon, some kind of atmospheric storm that disrupted time, objectively or subjectively, end quote. And she found a number of cases, which she puts forth in the first section of her book. Then in the second half, she, quote, looks at what science has come to understand about the nature of time and how it leads almost full circle back to the cases we have just discussed, end quote. So, it sounds like a very interesting book that I would love to read, but I can't right now, sadly. Let me know if you have read it. Sounds great. So I have one more story that concerns missing time and driving, so let me read that one for you now. This story was submitted by John and took place in February 2003. I moved to Kalamazoo from Flint, Michigan in August of 2002 while attending Western Michigan University. On weekends, I would drive back Sunday mornings to Flint to play organ at my church, have lunch with my family, and then I would drive back to Kalamazoo in the evenings. One particular evening in February of 2003, I went to my mom's house after lunch and hung out for a while. My mom advised me that there was a snowstorm coming and to call her when I got home so that she'd know I was okay. I left the house just a few minutes after 6 p.m. and headed west on I-69. I decided I would get off at M43 in the Lansing area, which runs pretty much straight to Kalamazoo. That way, I could avoid the freeway if weather became inclement. As soon as I hit the exit ramp, it began to snow, blizzard style. I thought to myself how convenient it was that I just got off the freeway and wouldn't have to deal with the congestion that would surely await on the highway. As I approached the stop sign at the end of the ramp, I saw what looked to me like a deer standing in the middle of the road. Except it wasn't deer-colored. It was practically glowing a subtle neon blue. I blinked a few times, but it didn't disappear. I waited for a couple seconds, and it started to wander off to the opposite side of the road in no hurry before disappearing into the trees. I don't know about you, but I had never seen a neon blue deer before. I chalked it up to the light from my headlights reflecting off the snow or something, and I turned towards Kalamazoo and started my way down the road. The roads became terrible quickly. The snow piled up, and the closer I got to Kalamazoo, more had already fallen. It was maybe 30 minutes onto the road I was on that I realized I wasn't seeing any traffic. I mean, any traffic. No cars, no snowplows. Aside from streetlights, I also wasn't noticing any lights on in people's houses. I was driving maybe 30 or 40 miles per hour at the fastest, taking my time and trying to avoid sliding off the road. When the road I was on split, I began to notice traffic again and lights on in the houses. Eventually, I pulled up to my driveway and went inside to hang with my roommates. Now, I had listened to a couple cassette tapes in their entirety on the way home. Lateralis by Tool, and Boingo by Oingo Boingo. Ugh, I love Oingo Boingo. The combined running length of these two albums is a little over 150 minutes. After the second tape finished, I was close enough to Kalamazoo that I figured starting another album wouldn't be necessary, so I switched to the radio and heard probably 4 or 5 tunes before reaching my house. All in all, I figured it had taken me about 3 hours, maybe a little more, to get home. When I walked in the house, I went to the phone immediately to call my mom. She asked me if I was at home and how fast I had traveled. I told her that I took it nice and slow and got off the highway when it started snowing and made sure to be extra careful. She asked me if I knew what time it was. At this point, I was already getting the heebie-jeebies and realized I hadn't really looked at the clock in the van, but glancing at the microwave, it read 7:43. I asked her if it was almost 8 o'clock. She said, "Yes. You made the drive in an hour and a half." After a bit more conversation, I ended up telling her that I actually took the freeway and had to apologize for speeding that I never did, and promised to slow down in the future. After the call, I went out to the van. The clock in my van read 9:20. According to the clock in my car, it took a little over 3 hours to get home. According to my mom, who corroborated the time I left, and my roommates, who corroborated the time I got home, it took about an hour and a half. The only explanation that makes sense, even though it sounds crazy, is that somewhere between Lansing and Kalamazoo, I hit a time slip. It was heralded by that neon blue deer, and that's why I didn't see any cars for an hour and a half. That's a particularly interesting story. The blue deer is something. To me, this is not a case of that meditative state you can hit while driving to a familiar destination. Maybe if it was just a normal day, that could be the explanation. But the fact that it was snowing really hard, so they had to be present. They weren't zoning out. I'm sure they were very focused and probably freaked out, extra aware, honestly. And they were present enough to have all these little details, like seeing this deer and noticing that they didn't see any traffic, noticing that there was no lights on in the houses on this particular stretch of road. They remember the albums they listened to, how many songs they heard on the radio, so they were present. It wasn't like they were zoned out. And then interesting that the time on their car and in their house marked different times. So they really felt the whole 3 hours that it took for them to travel. Didn't happen in a blink. It's interesting to me that they felt that whole amount of time. Very interesting. I also do think it's intriguing that they entered this weird spot. They saw the deer, and then they were in this kind of weird space where they didn't see any other cars, and all the lights were off in these houses, which, you could say maybe it was a power outage in the area because it was storming. Who knows? But it does remind me of the Bobtown story, the last story we read, where they were driving through this sleepy little town and they hit the mist. It's weird that these time slips or missing time seem to be marked by something, whether it's a mist, whether it's a blue deer, and then you enter this weird kind of almost like a non-space. I don't know how to explain that. Anyway, I do just have an interest of experiences. Like I said, I do have a series, maybe 2 videos, I think, concerning things that happen on the road while people are driving. So, those are all the stories that concern missing time while driving. Let's read a couple more. I've got just a couple more for you, and they may or may not concern time travelers. This story was submitted by Morgan and took place in Colorado in June 2007. I ducked into the phone booth in front of the CU building on 14th Street during a thunderstorm, and I found a cassette tape. The tape was in a paper sleeve that said in big black letters, "Do not listen to this tape." This had to have been left by time travelers because 1, phone booth, always known to be a time traveler hotspot. 2, a cassette tape. This was like in 2007. So it had to have either been from the past or from the future when cassettes got retro cool again. What was on the tape? I have no idea. I was not about to risk whatever sort of mummy-style curse that might come about from disobeying very clear instructions. So, I kept it with my other tapes for safekeeping. I eventually had it in a storage unit. Now, this is where it gets weird. All of my tapes vanished from the storage unit, totally disappeared. I'm guessing someone came to retrieve the tape and just took them all to make sure they got the right one. Okay, so I think they really took some liberties with the narrative they put forth in this story. But it's fun. It's very fun. Finding a cassette tape in a phone booth that says, "Do not listen to this tape." They immediately think that this has to be left by time travelers, citing that phone booths are known to be a time traveler hotspot. Is that like a Doctor Who kind of thing? I've never seen Doctor Who. Is that a thing in Doctor Who? Is that why that's a time traveler hotspot? I don't know. Now, I get where they were coming from with not wanting to listen to the tape. Some kind of Evil Dead situation could arise, I suppose, but would you really be able to follow these instructions and not listen to the tape? I don't think I'd even really have a means to listen to a cassette tape. I'd have to go to Goodwill and get a cassette player, which I'd be happy to do. But I think I would have to listen to what was on the tape. There's no way I'm finding a random cassette tape left in a phone booth that says "don't listen" and not listen, right? What would you do? Tell me what you would do. Man, and they lost it. That sucks. Hey, let me know if you have the mystery cassette tape as well. That'd be a cool, creative idea. I should make the mystery cassette tape. That'd be fun, right? What do you think is on the cassette tape? Is it music? Is it speaking? Like I said, it is a very fun story, whether any ounce of it is true or not. Alright, so the next story was submitted by Garrett Kelly and took place in January of 2005. It's titled Time Travel Mailbox. Before I read it, I should kind of explain this photograph. If you're watching, there will be some photographs on the screen, so take a look. I'm going to describe it anyway. So we have a photograph of a rainy sidewalk and a table and a suitcase. An open suitcase that is mostly empty except for some pieces of paper. It's a very grimy suitcase, by the way. There is this weird bar of light kind of streaking upwards over the suitcase. I don't know if that's some kind of lens flare or something. What caused that? So, the post says, "Here is a picture of the suitcase from a couple of years ago. Portal of light was not visible to the naked eye when I took this photograph. Also, check out the letter from a time traveler that was found in the box in 2005. If you visit here, open the suitcase seat and leave or reply to messages left here by time travelers. Beware time hunters." I'm not sure what that means. Beware time hunters, let me know if you know. So they have another picture here, well, it's a scan, it looks like, of a page torn out of a book or a magazine or something called The Watchtower. I'm gonna have to look this up. Give me a second on that. But written over top this torn page is some scrawled writing that says, "Welcome to my secret note. Thank you for believing in time travel. Jared. Please reply." So, I did want to find out more about the time travel mailbox. This took place in Seattle, by the way. I forgot to mention that. This is in Seattle. So, looking this up, Seattle, I did something like Seattle time travel mailbox or suitcase or something like that. There was a TikTok posted by Liminal Earth about it. I'll play that TikTok for you now.
I'm in Seattle, Washington. I'm going to visit the time travel mailbox. We're at the corner of 20th and Union. Back in 2004, my friend Jake was walking down the street, and he came across a suitcase. When he opened this box, he found a letter. It said, "Welcome to my secret note. Thank you for believing in time travel. Please write back, Jared." And for the last 20 years, you've been able to open this suitcase, leave messages, take messages or weird objects, but now it's been locked. Someone put a combination lock. I don't know if it was time travelers. I don't know who did this. But I can still get a note into this little crack. So I'm gonna write a note for Jared and leave it here.
So they put the intersection where the suitcase is located. So I found it, and it's at 20th Avenue and East Union Street. And it is a table outside of a coffee shop called Katie's Corner Cafe. They did say in the Liminal Earth post that it was they called it the suitcase seat. And yeah, it looks like this suitcase is a chair or a stool arranged at this table outside this coffee shop. So you can sit on it. Of course, according to the TikTok, you can't open it anymore. Not sure what caused that. Who knows what disturbing or terrible or gross manner of things people could think to put inside the suitcase. If you're making a visit to the suitcase, don't do anything weird or gross or dangerous or anything. Just have fun with it. Slip a little note in there or something, or a picture or something fun and geocachy. I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but that's a cool idea. Shame you can't open it anymore. I'm sure someone ruined the fun by doing something weird. When it comes to Jared, the time traveler, do you think he was a time traveler? What would you say? What would your reply be to Jared? Let me see if I could find anything out about the book that the page was ripped from. All it says at the bottom, it has a picture of a sailboat on the page called The Quest. It might be biblical. I'm getting a little biblical vibes. I'm not sure. So that is all I have for now. I hope you enjoyed those stories and our little journey through time and Google Street View. If you enjoyed this format, I do have a playlist of me reading stories from Liminal Earth and going through their locations, just like this video. So if you enjoyed that, check it out. But for now, I will see you next time. Good night.